Let me tell you about something that's been unfolding across the Middle East and Caucasus over the past few years, something that fundamentally changes the regional power structure but hasn't received the attention it deserves in Western media. Russia, Iran, and Turkey, three countries with vastly different political systems, historical grievances, and religious identities, have developed a level of coordination that's reshaping the entire region. And I'm not talking about occasional diplomatic pleasantries or symbolic summits. I'm talking about systematic operational coordination on military matters, economic policy, and regional security that's creating a genuine alternative power structure to American influence. This wasn't inevitable. Just a decade ago, these three countries were backing opposite sides in Syria's civil war. Russia was keeping Assad in power. Iran was providing Shia militias and Revolutionary Guard support. Turkey was arming Sunni opposition groups trying to overthrow the regime. They were fighting a proxy war against each other. Today, they coordinate more closely with each other than Turkey, a NATO member, coordinates with the United States. Let me walk you through how this happened and what it means, because the implications are staggering. Start with Syria, because that's where this coordination became operational reality. In 2017, Russia, Turkey, and Iran launched the Astana process, a diplomatic framework for managing the Syrian conflict. This wasn't a UN initiative. This wasn't led by the United States or European powers. This was three regional actors deciding they would determine Syria's future themselves. And it worked. The Astana process has held more than 20 rounds of talks. It established de-escalation zones. It coordinated ceasefires. Most importantly, it created a mechanism where Russian, Turkish, and Iranian officials meet regularly to divide up influence, manage conflicts between their proxies, and present a unified front against Western intervention. The results are visible on the ground. Turkey controls a significant portion of northern Syria, areas like Afrin, Jarablus, Al-Bab, with what appears to be explicit Russian and Iranian acceptance. Turkish military forces operate there. Turkish-backed militias control territory. Turkey even collects taxes and provides services. Russia and Iran could make this untenable if they wanted to. They don't, because Turkey's presence serves their interests by preventing Kurdish autonomy and blocking American influence. Russia maintains its naval base at Tartus and air base at Khmeimim, has decisive influence over the Assad government, and has become the dominant external power in Syria. Iran keeps its land corridor from Tehran through Iraq and Syria to Hezbollah in Lebanon, maintains Revolutionary Guard presence, and has embedded itself in Syrian security structures. Think about what this represents operationally. Turkish, Russian, and Iranian officers communicate regularly. They deconflict airspace. Turkish aircraft operating in northern Syria don't get shot down by Russian air defenses because there are established protocols. They share intelligence about groups they all oppose, particularly Kurdish forces. They coordinate military operations against shared threats. This level of military coordination between a NATO member and two countries that the United States considers adversaries would have been unthinkable during the Cold War. It's happening now routinely. But Syria isn't the only theater. Look at Libya, and you see a similar pattern developing. Officially, Turkey and Russia back different sides. Turkey supports the government of national accord based in Tripoli in western Libya. Russia backs Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army controlling the east. Turkish and Russian-backed forces have actually fought each other. Yet by 2020, something changed. The two sides established deconfliction mechanisms. There are reports of direct communication between Russian and Turkish military officials managing the conflict. The fighting has largely frozen into a de facto partition that serves both Russian and Turkish interests. Russia gains access to Libyan oil infrastructure and potential Mediterranean naval facilities. Turkey maintains influence over western Libya, controls migration routes to Europe, and can use Libya as leverage over European countries. Neither Russia nor Turkey wants the other side to win completely, so they've reached an accommodation. Western influence in Libya, meanwhile, has become marginal despite NATO's 2011 intervention that toppled Gaddafi. The 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war in the Caucasus showed the coordination even more clearly. Azerbaijan, strongly backed by Turkey with weapons, training, and political support, defeated Armenia in a 6-week war. Armenia has a mutual defense treaty with Russia. Russia is supposed to defend Armenia from external aggression, but Moscow's response was restrained. Russia didn't intervene militarily on Armenia's behalf. Russian weapons sales to Armenia had been limited in the years before the war. When fighting ended, Russian peacekeepers deployed, but the ceasefire terms heavily favored Azerbaijan and Turkey. Why would Russia allow its treaty ally to lose significant territory? Because Moscow and Ankara had coordinated. Turkey achieved its objectives, strengthening Azerbaijan, opening transport corridors through Armenian territory, expanding Turkish influence in the South Caucasus. Russia maintained peacekeeping forces in the region, kept military bases, and retained leverage over both Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia, which had been exploring closer ties with the West and had a reform-minded government, learned the cost of insufficient loyalty to Moscow. It's a message other post-Soviet states noticed. Iran's role was quieter but significant. Tehran shares a border with both Armenia and Azerbaijan. An Azerbaijani victory could have threatened Iranian interests, but Tehran appears to have accepted the outcome in exchange for Russian and Turkish assurances on other matters. The three powers managed the conflict together. The economic integration reinforcing this political coordination is substantial. Start with Russia and Iran. Both countries are under comprehensive Western sanctions, which creates natural incentives for cooperation. Bilateral trade has grown significantly, from around $3.5 billion in 2019 to over $5 billion by 2023, with projections to reach $10 billion. But it's not just the volume, it's what they're trading. Russia provides advanced weapon systems that Iran can't get elsewhere. The S-300 air defense system delivered to Iran, fighter aircraft. Russia is helping Iran develop its nuclear energy program through the Bushehr reactor and potentially other facilities. In return, Iran has provided Russia with Shahed drones. The loitering munitions that have been used extensively in Ukraine are based on Iranian designs. There are reports of deeper military-industrial cooperation, technology transfers, joint weapons development, potentially Iranian production facilities being established in Russia, or Russian designs being produced in Iran under license. Russia and Turkey maintain even more extensive economic ties, despite being on opposite sides of various conflicts. Turkey imports approximately 45% of its natural gas from Russia, primarily through the Turk Stream pipeline that came online in 2020. That's not just a commercial relationship, it's strategic dependence that gives Moscow leverage over Ankara. Turkey's first nuclear power plant at Akkuyu is being built by Russia's Rosatom in a $20 billion project. Russia is financing most of the construction and will operate the plant. When it's fully operational, it will provide roughly 10% of Turkey's electricity. Russia will control a significant portion of Turkish power generation for decades. Bilateral trade between Russia and Turkey exceeded $62 billion in 2022 and has remained substantial despite Turkey's NATO membership and the Ukraine conflict. Russian tourists are the largest source of tourism revenue for Turkey, over 5 million Russian visitors annually, bringing approximately $7 billion. Turkish construction companies work on major projects in Russia. Turkish agricultural products flow to Russian markets. This creates economic interdependence that constrains Turkey's foreign policy. When the West pushed Turkey to fully join sanctions on Russia after the Ukraine invasion, Ankara refused. Turkey couldn't afford to lose Russian gas, Russian tourists, Russian trade. The economic ties gave Moscow leverage. Iran and Turkey also have significant trade despite historical rivalry and religious differences. Turkey is majority Sunni, Iran is majority Shia. Bilateral trade has grown to over $30 billion annually. Turkey serves as a crucial outlet for Iranian goods and provides products Iran can't easily obtain from the West due to sanctions. Turkish banks and companies facilitate transactions that would be difficult through Western financial systems. The military dimension extends beyond Syria. Russia has sold Turkey the S-400 air defense system, one of Russia's most advanced weapons platforms. This caused a crisis with NATO. The United States expelled Turkey from the F-35 fighter program because the S-400 could potentially gather intelligence on the stealth aircraft. Turkey activated the S-400 in 2020 despite American threats of sanctions. Think about what that decision reveals. Turkey chose Russian weapon systems over American ones, accepted expulsion from a major NATO program, and risked sanctions from its formal military alliance because the relationship with Russia provided benefits Turkey valued more than maintaining full NATO integration. Russia has also upgraded Turkey's older military equipment, provided training, and there are discussions about potential joint defense industry projects. Iran has received Russian air defense systems and other weapons. Both countries are negotiating for additional Russian military equipment. Now, let me tell you why these three very different countries find coordination so valuable, because understanding the incentives explains why this isn't temporary. First, shared opposition to American dominance in the region. All three see the United States as the primary obstacle to their regional ambitions. Russia wants to restore great power status and resents NATO expansion into what Moscow considers its sphere of influence. Iran has been under American sanctions and military threat for over 40 years. Turkey, despite NATO membership, increasingly views American policy as hostile, supporting Kurdish groups Turkey considers terrorists, imposing or threatening sanctions, restricting arms sales, lecturing about democracy and human rights. This creates common ground. When the United States is weakened or distracted, all three benefit. When American initiatives fail, they gain space to operate. They don't need to agree on everything. They just need to agree that limiting American influence serves their interests. Second, authoritarian governance models. Russia under Putin is increasingly authoritarian. Iran is a theocratic regime. Turkey under Erdogan has moved sharply away from democracy, jailing journalists, controlling courts, suppressing opposition. All three leaders see Western democracy promotion and human rights advocacy as threats to their regime's survival. They share an interest in defending sovereignty as non-interference in internal affairs, opposing color revolutions and regime change, and maintaining systems where power is centralized. This creates ideological affinity even across very different political systems. Third, pragmatic acceptance of spheres of influence. Unlike Western powers that frame foreign policy in terms of universal values and rules-based order, Russia, Iran, and Turkey operate on traditional great power principles. Strong countries have spheres of influence. Security concerns of major powers are legitimate. Borders and governments can change through force if necessary. This shared realist worldview makes negotiation easier. They're not arguing about principles of sovereignty or self-determination. They're negotiating concrete divisions of influence, access to resources, control over territory. It's transactional in ways that allow deal-making even between countries with very different ideologies. Fourth, complementary capabilities. This is crucial. Russia provides conventional military power, air forces, air defense systems, electronic warfare, special forces. Iran provides asymmetric capabilities, militia networks, ballistic missiles, drones, ideological influence among Shia populations across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen. Turkey provides NATO standard military equipment and training, economic connections to both the West and the Middle East, and influence over Sunni populations and Turkic-speaking peoples in Central Asia and the Caucasus. Together, they cover the full spectrum of power in ways that none could achieve independently. Russia alone doesn't have the ground force presence across the region. Iran alone lacks air power and air defense. Turkey alone lacks the willingness to directly confront the United States, but together they create a formidable bloc. The implications for American interests and regional stability are profound. The United States has military forces in Syria, roughly 900 troops officially supporting Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces in eastern Syria. These forces operate in a region where Russian, Turkish, and Iranian forces are all present and coordinated. American troops are essentially surrounded by countries that coordinate against American interests. If Russia, Turkey, and Iran decided to make the American presence untenable, blocking supply routes, pressuring local partners, creating security threats, the United States would face difficult choices about whether to escalate or withdraw. Our Kurdish allies, who were essential partners in defeating ISIS, are increasingly vulnerable. Turkey views them as extensions of the PKK, which Turkey, the US, and EU all designate as a terrorist organization. Turkey has launched multiple military operations against Kurdish forces in Syria. Russia and Iran haven't stopped these operations because allowing Turkey to pressure the Kurds serves their interest in limiting American influence. We promise our Kurdish partners protection, but our ability to deliver it is constrained by the fact that doing so would mean confronting a NATO ally who coordinates with two major powers. Regional conflicts are increasingly managed without American participation or even consultation. The Astana process on Syria doesn't include the United States. The 3+3 format proposed for the South Caucasus, Russia, Turkey, Iran, plus Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, excludes external powers. When the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war ended, the ceasefire was negotiated between Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan with Turkish involvement. The United States was informed, not consulted. This is a fundamental shift from the post-Cold War era, when American mediation was assumed for regional conflicts. Now, Russia, Iran, and Turkey are the relevant players. They make decisions, present them as accomplished facts, and American objections are noted and ignored. Energy markets are shaped by this coordination as well. Russia and Iran together control enormous oil and gas reserves. Turkey controls critical transit routes. Pipelines from the Caspian to Europe go through Turkish territory. Tanker traffic from the Black Sea goes through Turkish straits. They coordinate on pipeline routes, pricing mechanisms, and supply decisions in ways that affect European energy security and global markets. The United States has limited ability to counter this. We can sanction Russia and Iran, which we've done, but that pushes them closer together and makes Turkey more valuable as an intermediary. We can't sanction Turkey without risking NATO fracture. We can offer alternative energy supplies, but we can't physically replace the pipelines and infrastructure that tie these countries together. Here's what troubles me most about this situation. We created the conditions for this coordination through our own policies. By trying to contain Russia, isolate Iran, and pressure Turkey simultaneously, we pushed three very different countries into each other's arms. NATO expansion eastward, regardless of its merits from a defensive standpoint, convinced Russia that the West sought to weaken and encircle it. Comprehensive sanctions on Iran for decades with no pathway to normalization convinced Tehran that accommodation with the West was impossible. Support for Kurdish groups in Syria, sanctions threats over the S-400, and democracy promotion that Erdogan saw as regime change convinced Turkey that American partnership came with unacceptable costs. Each of these countries looked around for partners who would accept them as they are and coordinate on shared interests without demanding political transformation. They found each other. And now we face a coordination mechanism that's flexible, durable, and expanding. It's not a formal alliance with treaty obligations. It's something potentially more sustainable, ongoing coordination based on mutual benefit without the rigidity of formal commitments. The infrastructure being built will last for decades. Pipelines operate for 50 years. Nuclear power plants run for 40 years. Economic relationships create dependencies that are difficult to reverse. Military coordination builds institutional relationships and personal ties between officers and officials. The question isn't whether this coordination will continue. The incentives are too strong. Russia needs regional partners to offset Western isolation. Iran needs allies to counter American pressure and Israeli threats. Turkey needs room to pursue regional ambitions that NATO membership constrains. The question is whether American policymakers will recognize this reality and develop strategies appropriate for it. Can we accept that our influence in the Middle East and Caucasus is constrained by this bloc? Can we prioritize among our interests and accept that we can't have everything we want? Can we find ways to work with or around this coordination rather than futilely trying to break it? Or will we continue policies built on assumptions of American primacy in a region where that primacy no longer exists? Russia, Iran, and Turkey have rewritten regional power, not through a single dramatic event, but systematically over several years through the Astana process, economic integration, military coordination, and shared opposition to American dominance. The architecture is operational. The relationships are institutionalized. The coordination is routine. We're living with the consequences, and we'll continue living with them for decades. The only question is whether we'll adapt intelligently to this new reality or keep pretending the regional order still works the way it did when American power was uncontested, because that world is gone and it's not coming back.